Clara never imagined that losing her parents would also cost her freedom. At 19, devastated by grief and vulnerable, she was told by her cruel relatives that she would marry a stranger, a powerful 49-year-old millionaire, to pay off their debts. As she walked down the aisle in a borrowed white dress, her heart broke with every step. But William Blackwood wasn't the monster she expected. What happened next would change everything she believed about love, sacrifice, and second chances. If this story has already sparked your curiosity, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments, where are you listening to this story from? Your support is what keeps these moving stories coming to life. The autumn rain beat against the windows of the modest house on the outskirts of Charleston, each drop echoing the hollow pain that had settled in Clara's chest since the accident 3 months ago. She was curled up in the corner of the worn velvet armchair that had belonged to her mother, holding a faded photograph of her parents, her father's gentle smile frozen in time, her mother's artistic hands resting on his shoulder. "Clara, come downstairs immediately." Uncle Gregory's voice cut through the silence like a blade, sharp and impatient. She pressed the photograph against her heart, feeling the familiar weight of grief threatening to pull her under. Since moving into Uncle Gregory and Aunt Linda's house, each day felt like walking through thick fog, never finding solid ground. The house smelled of Linda's overpowering perfume and Gregory's cigars, nothing like the warm scent of her mother's paints and her father's old books that had once filled their small but happy home. "Clara?" Gregory's voice thundered again, this time with an irritation that made her stomach clench. She descended the narrow staircase slowly, her bare feet making no sound on the cold wooden floor. Her aunt and uncle were in the living room, Gregory standing near the unlit fireplace with his hands clasped behind his back, while Linda sat rigidly on the sofa, her lips pursed in that familiar, disapproving line. "Sit down," Gregory ordered, gesturing to the chair across from them as if she were a child being summoned for punishment. Clara obeyed, her hands trembling slightly as she placed the photograph in her lap. Something about the atmosphere in the room made her uneasy. There was an electric tension in the air, as if a storm were about to break. "Clara, your aunt and I have had to make a difficult decision," Gregory began, his voice taking on a falsely paternal tone she had learned to fear. "Since you came to live with us, we've tried to do our best for you, but our financial situation, well, let's just say things have gotten complicated." Linda sighed dramatically, running her hand through her perfectly styled hair. "Your father, God rest his soul, left behind many debts, dear. Debts that became our responsibility when you became our ward." Clara's heart began to race. She knew that tone. It was the same one they used when explaining why they couldn't pay for a new school for her, why her clothes had to be bought at thrift stores, why she couldn't take art classes like she'd always dreamed. "I don't understand," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "You said the insurance covered everything," Gregory laughed bitterly. "The insurance covered the funeral and little else. Your father had loans you couldn't even imagine, Clara. Loans that are now our responsibility. Fortunately," Linda interrupted with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "we've found a solution to all our problems." Clara felt a chill run down her spine. "What kind of solution?" Gregory moved closer, his features hardening. "You're going to get married, Clara, to a very respectable and financially stable man who can solve our difficulties." The world seemed to collapse around her. "Get married? But I'm only 19, I haven't even—" Her voice failed, the words lost in the heavy air of the room. "William Blackwood is a very successful businessman," Linda continued as if Clara hadn't spoken. "He's 49 years old, owns several companies, and most importantly, he's willing to take on all the debts in exchange for a matrimonial arrangement." "An arrangement?" Clara stood up abruptly, the photograph falling to the floor. "You're talking about selling me?" Gregory's face twisted with anger. "Don't be dramatic. It's a marriage, not a sale. Many women would kill for an opportunity like this." "He's wealthy, Clara," Linda added, her voice taking on an almost pleading tone. "You'll have everything you've always wanted. Beautiful clothes, a big house, financial security." "I don't want that," Clara screamed, tears beginning to burn her eyes. "I want my parents back. I want my life back." Gregory stepped dangerously close, his voice low and threatening. "Your parents are gone, Clara, and your life now depends on the decisions we make for you. The wedding is scheduled for next Saturday." Next Saturday. Clara felt her legs weaken. That's in 5 days. "Enough time for you to prepare and accept your new reality," Linda said coldly. "We've already bought your dress and arranged the ceremony. It will be small, just family and a few witnesses." Clara looked from one to the other, searching for any sign of compassion in their faces, but found only cold determination and financial calculation. These weren't the aunt and uncle who used to visit her family during holidays, who brought Christmas presents. Her parents' death had revealed cruel strangers who saw her tragedy as an opportunity. "And if I refuse?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Gregory smiled without humor. "You're 18 years old, Clara. Technically, you're still our responsibility until you turn 21. You can choose a comfortable marriage to a respectable man, or you can try life on your own on the streets without a penny, without an education, without anything." The threat hung in the air like poisonous smoke. Clara knew they would do exactly what they promised. She had already seen the coldness with which they treated other relatives in difficulty. "Do you already know this man?" she asked, her voice sounding distant even to her own ears. "We know him through intermediaries," Linda replied. "He's a widower, childless, and looking for a young, respectable wife." Clara closed her eyes, trying to block out the reality crashing over her like an avalanche. In her mind, she could still hear her mother's laughter, feel her father's protective embrace. How had she gotten to this moment? How had she become a commodity to be traded? "Mr. Blackwood will come to pick you up on Friday for dinner," Gregory continued, oblivious to the world crumbling inside her. "Consider it a getting-to-know-you date." But nothing he said after that penetrated the fog of shock that enveloped Clara. She just stood there in the middle of the room that was never really her home, feeling more orphaned than ever. The mirror reflected a stranger Clara barely recognized. The wedding dress, hastily bought by Aunt Linda, fell perfectly over her delicate shoulders, the white silk fabric contrasting with her brown hair, loose in soft waves. The French lace veil framed her pale face, and the borrowed pearls gleamed discreetly at her neck. On the outside, she looked like a fairy tale princess. On the inside, she felt like a condemned woman walking to the scaffold. "You look beautiful, dear," Linda murmured behind her, adjusting the veil for the 3rd time. Her voice carried a satisfaction that made Clara's stomach turn. "My mother should be here," Clara whispered, touching the pearls with trembling fingers. "She should be helping me get dressed, telling me everything would be okay." Linda sighed impatiently. "Clara, you need to stop living in the past. Today marks the beginning of your new life." New life. The words sounded hollow, meaningless. Clara closed her eyes, trying to conjure her mother's face, but the image was becoming more blurred with each passing day. The fear of forgetting was almost as terrible as the fear of what awaited her at the altar. "It's time." Gregory appeared in the doorway, adjusting his tie. He seemed more excited than Clara had seen him in months. After all his financial worries would be solved in a matter of minutes. The small local church was decorated with white and gold flowers, an atmosphere that should have been romantic, but felt suffocating to Clara. The few guests, curious neighbors, and some acquaintances of her aunt and uncle whispered among themselves, their gazes full of barely disguised pity. Everyone knew the truth behind this wedding, even though no one dared speak openly about it. "Breathe," Gregory murmured beside her as they waited at the church entrance. "Remember to smile." Smile. As if it were possible to fake joy when her heart was shattered into 1,000 pieces. The wedding march began to play, and the church doors opened. Clara took the first step, her feet feeling like lead inside the uncomfortable white shoes. With each step, she felt as though she were moving further away from the life she had known, from the girl she used to be. At the altar, with his back to her, stood the man who would be her husband. William Blackwood was tall and imposing, his broad shoulders perfectly filling the tailored dark suit. When he turned to see her approaching, Clara had to hold her breath. He was handsome. Not the horrible monster her imagination had created during the sleepless nights of the past week. His dark hair had silver streaks at the temples, and his eyes, blue like a stormy ocean, watched her with an intensity that made her tremble. There was something in his face, a hardness that spoke of years of command and control, but also a strange vulnerability she hadn't expected to find. "You look beautiful," he said quietly when she finally reached the altar, his deep voice resonating only for her. There was sincerity in his words, but also something more, a sadness that mirrored her own. The priest began the ceremony, his words flowing like a distant river that Clara could barely hear. Her heart was beating so loudly she was sure everyone in the church could hear it. William's hands, when he took hers, were large and warm, but she still trembled at his touch. "Clara Marie," the priest called her, and she realized it was time for the vows. I do," she murmured, her voice so low it could barely be heard. The words came out like broken glass, cutting her throat. "William James." It was his turn, and his response was firm and clear. "I do." When the priest declared them husband and wife, Clara felt as if a heavy door had definitively closed behind her. There was no turning back. She was no longer Clara, the orphaned daughter being raised by her aunt and uncle. Now she was Clara Blackwood, wife of a stranger. "You may kiss the bride," the priest announced with a benevolent smile. William leaned toward her, and Clara instinctively closed her eyes. She expected something possessive, dominating, but the kiss was surprisingly gentle, a soft touch of lips that lasted only a moment. When she opened her eyes, she saw something in his that she couldn't decipher. Regret, compassion, or just resignation? The guests applauded politely as they walked back down the aisle, now as husband and wife. Clara forced a smile onto her lips, playing the role expected of her. But inside she felt completely empty. Outside the church, Linda hugged her with exaggerated force. "You did the right thing, Clara. Your husband is a lucky man." Gregory shook William's hand with obvious enthusiasm. "Take good care of our Clara. She's special." As if they really cared, Clara thought bitterly. As if they hadn't just sold her like cattle at market. "Ready?" William asked quietly, offering his arm. Clara looked back one last time, at the church where she had married a stranger, at the aunt and uncle who had betrayed her, at the life she was leaving behind. Then, with her heart heavy as stone, she placed her hand on her husband's arm. "Ready," she lied. The luxurious black car waiting for them looked like an elegant coffin. As they drove away from the church toward her new life, Clara pressed her forehead against the cold window and allowed the tears to finally fall. Through the fogged glass, the world outside seemed as distant as the dreams she had lost. Beside her, William remained silent, his hands folded in his lap, looking ahead with an unreadable expression. But Clara didn't know that he was also fighting his own demons, nor that the fragile girl beside him had awakened something in his heart that he thought had been dead for a long time. The Blackwood mansion rose against the night sky like a castle from a dark fairy tale. Clara pressed her face against the car window, watching the illuminated windows that looked like golden eyes, observing her arrival. The wrought iron gate opened automatically, and they traveled down a long driveway lined with century-old oak trees whose branches intertwined overhead like skeletal fingers. "It's big," Clara murmured, her first attempt at conversation since they'd left the church. William looked at her, noticing how her fingers nervously played with the pearls of her necklace. "It might seem intimidating at first, but it's just a house." "Just a house?" Clara almost laughed at the irony. The house where she'd grown up with her parents would easily fit in this property's garage. The driver stopped in front of the main entrance, where marble steps led to double doors of carved oak. William got out first and extended his hand to help her, a chivalrous gesture that surprised her. His fingers were firm and warm, an unexpected anchor amid the ocean of uncertainty her life had become. "Welcome to your new home, Clara," he said softly, and there was something in his voice, a hesitation, perhaps even nervousness, that made her look at him more carefully. The mansion's interior was even more impressive than the exterior. The main foyer stretched up 2 stories, with a curved white marble staircase that gracefully ascended to the second floor. Crystals hung from golden chandeliers, casting colorful rainbows on the dark wood-paneled walls. "Mrs. Blackwood," a gentle voice called to her, and Clara turned to see a middle-aged woman with grey hair pulled back in an elegant bun. "I'm Martha, the housekeeper. It's a pleasure to finally meet you." The genuine warmth in Martha's voice was like a balm to Clara's wounded soul. It's a pleasure to meet you too. Martha takes care of everything here, William explained. If you need anything, you can ask her. I've prepared the ladies' room according to your instructions, Mr. Blackwood, Martha said, and Clara noticed a meaningful exchange of glances between them. The ladies' room, not their room. Clara felt a strange mixture of relief and confusion. I'll show you the way, William said, gesturing for her to follow him up the staircase. They climbed in silence, Clara's footsteps echoing softly on the polished marble. The second-floor hallway was long and lined with old portraits, generations of Blackwoods who watched her with stern eyes. Clara wondered what kind of women had walked these corridors before her, if any had felt as lost as she felt now. William stopped in front of a mahogany door and opened it, revealing a room that took Clara's breath away. It was 3 times larger than any room she had ever seen, decorated in soft shades of blue and silver. A canopy bed dominated the center, surrounded by antique furniture that looked like it had come from a palace. French windows opened onto a balcony that overlooked formal gardens illuminated by moonlight. "This is your room," William said, observing her reaction. "I chose the blue because, well, it matches your eyes." Clara looked at him in surprise. He had noticed the color of her eyes. "It's beautiful," she murmured, gently touching the blue silk of the curtains. "But I thought that we would sleep in the same room," William finished gently. He approached the window, looking down at the gardens below. "Clara, I know this marriage wasn't your choice. I know you're here because you had no alternative." The brutal honesty in his words hit her like a punch to the stomach. At least he wasn't pretending this was a fairy tale. "I won't pretend it's love," he continued, turning to face her. "But you don't need to be afraid of me either. I won't force you into anything. When and if you want to, well, that's for you to decide." Clara felt tears burning her eyes. From the moment she'd learned about the marriage, she had imagined horrible scenarios of violence and coercion. William's unexpected kindness completely disarmed her. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you being kind to me?" William was silent for a long moment, studying her face in the soft light of the lamps. "Because you remind me of myself, a long time ago. Lost alone without choices. Were you forced to marry too?" A bitter smile touched his lips. "In a way, yes, but that's a story for another day." He headed for the door, then stopped. "Clara? Yes? I know it might not mean much coming from me, but I'm sorry for the loss of your parents, and I'm sorry for the circumstances that brought you here." With that, he left, closing the door softly behind him and leaving Clara alone in the luxurious room that was now hers. She sat on the edge of the enormous bed, still wearing her wedding dress, and finally allowed the tears to flow freely. But they weren't just tears of sadness. There was also confusion and a relief she hadn't expected to feel. William Blackwood wasn't the monster she had imagined. He was something much more dangerous. He was human. And Clara didn't know if that made her situation better or infinitely more complicated. On the other side of the wall, in his own room, William stood by the window looking out at the same garden. His hands trembled slightly, something that hadn't happened in years, and he wondered what kind of change this fragile girl would bring to his carefully controlled life. One thing he knew for certain: nothing would be simple from now on. The first rays of sunlight penetrated through the blue silk curtains, awakening Clara from a restless sleep. For a moment she couldn't remember where she was. The high ceiling with ornate moldings, the sumptuous bed, the subtle scent of lavender in the air. Everything seemed like a dream. Then reality hit her like a cold wave. She was in the Blackwood mansion. She was William Blackwood's wife. Her life had changed forever. A gentle knock on the door made her sit up in bed, pulling on the silk robe she had found in the wardrobe. "Come in," she said hesitantly. Martha appeared, carrying a silver tray. "Good morning, Mrs. Blackwood. I brought your breakfast." "Thank you, Martha, but could you call me Clara, please?" Hearing Mrs. Blackwood still made her feel like she was playing a role she didn't know how to interpret. Martha smiled warmly. "Of course, dear." She placed the tray on the small table near the window. "Mr. William has already left for the office, but he left this for you." It was a cream envelope with her name written in elegant handwriting. Clara opened it with trembling fingers and found a simple card. "Clara, feel free to explore the house and gardens. If you need anything, Martha can help you." William. He's always been a man of few words, Martha commented, noticing Clara's thoughtful expression. But he has a good heart. He just needs time to open up. During the following weeks, Clara developed a quiet routine that helped her navigate the strange and lonely days. She woke up early, had breakfast in her room or in the small sunroom she had discovered on the ground floor, then explored the extensive gardens that became her refuge. William kept strict schedules. He left before 7 in the morning and returned only in the late afternoon. When they encountered each other in the hallways in the dining room during formal and silent meals, he was polite, respectful, but distant, like two strangers sharing an enormous house, carefully navigating around each other. "Do you like to read?" he asked one evening during dinner, breaking the usual silence. Clara almost dropped her fork in surprise. "Yes, very much. My father was a literature professor. There's a library on the second floor at the end of the east corridor. You can use any book you want." "Thank you," she murmured, curious about this unexpected concession. The next morning, Clara found the library and felt as if she had discovered a hidden treasure. The room was circular, with shelves that went from floor to ceiling, filled with leather books with golden titles. A rolling ladder provided access to the higher volumes, and large windows provided perfect natural light for reading. She spent hours there, lost among literature classics, art books, and volumes of poetry. It was like having a piece of her father back, the passion for words and stories he had cultivated in her since childhood. "Find something interesting?" William's voice startled her one afternoon. She turned around, holding a volume of Emily Dickinson against her chest. "Sorry, I didn't hear you come in. You don't need to apologize. This is your home now." He approached, noticing the book in her hands. "Dickinson, good choice. Are you familiar with her work?" William picked up another volume from the same shelf. She wrote about loneliness in a way that few understood in her time. He quoted from memory, "I'm nobody. Who are you? Are you nobody too?" Clara looked at him in surprise. She hadn't expected a businessman to know intimate poetry with such depth. "My first wife loved literature," he explained, noticing her expression. "Catherine taught me to appreciate things beyond contracts and numbers." It was the first time he had mentioned his deceased wife, and Clara felt unexpected curiosity. "Did she pass away long ago?" "5 years," William replied simply, returning the book to the shelf. "Cancer." The word hung in the air between them, loaded with poorly healed pain. Clara saw something in his eyes that she recognized, the familiar mark of grief, the loss that never completely stops hurting. "I'm sorry," she said softly. He nodded, then changed the subject. "Martha said you've been spending a lot of time in the gardens. They're beautiful, especially the rose garden. Catherine planned them. She had magic hands for making things grow." There was affection in his voice, but also melancholy. In the following days, Clara began to notice small things. Fresh flowers appeared in her room every morning, roses from the garden she had admired. Books she had mentioned interest in appeared on her bedside table. When she casually commented to Martha that she missed painting, a complete set of paints and canvases appeared in the sunroom. "It was Mr. Williams' idea," Martha said when Clara asked about the art supplies. He was paying attention. In a silent and careful way, William was trying to make her life more bearable, even without words or grand gestures. One night, Clara found him in the library, sitting in a leather armchair, reading by lamplight. He looked up when she entered. "Sorry to interrupt," she said. "You're not interrupting." He marked the page and closed the book. "Can't sleep. Sometimes I have nightmares," she admitted, surprising herself with her own honesty. "About the accident?" Clara nodded, hugging herself. "And about other things." William studied her for a moment, then stood up. "I'll ask Martha to prepare some chamomile tea. It helps with sleep." It was a small gesture, but the kindness behind it warmed something inside Clara that had been cold since her parents' death. For the first time since the marriage, she wondered if perhaps, just perhaps, she wasn't completely alone in that enormous house. But there was still so much she didn't know about the man who had become her husband, and Clara was beginning to suspect that behind his careful kindness, William Blackwood carried secrets that could change everything. Winter came early that year, bringing with it frigid nights that made the mansion's windows cover with a thin layer of ice. Clara had developed the habit of waiting for William to arrive from work, not out of obligation, but from a growing curiosity about the man who had become her husband. She would position herself in the library or the sunroom, where she could hear the sound of the car in the driveway and his firm footsteps in the marble foyer. On that particular Thursday, the snowstorm that had been forming during the day had intensified. Clara watched through the window, worried. It was already past 10 at night, and William still hadn't returned. Normally, he arrived at 6 o'clock sharp, with the punctuality of a Swiss watch. "The traffic must be terrible with this snow," Martha commented, bringing Clara a cup of hot chocolate. "He'll be home soon." But 11 o'clock passed, then midnight, and Clara found herself unable to go up to her room. Something inside her, a worry she couldn't explain, kept her awake, waiting. When she finally heard the sound of the car in the driveway, it was past 1 in the morning. Clara got up from the armchair where she had been reading, her heart racing with a relief that surprised her. Why did she care so much? When had she started worrying about William Blackwood? The front door opened with a heavy sound, followed by the sound of tired footsteps. Clara hesitated for a moment, then headed to the main foyer. William was removing his soaked coat, his dark hair wet from melted snow. His clothes were wrinkled, his tie loose, and there was an exhaustion in his shoulders she had never seen before. When he saw her standing on the staircase, he stopped moving. "Clara, why are you awake at this hour?" "I was worried," she admitted, descending the steps slowly. "You never come home this late." Something passed across his face. Surprise, perhaps even gratitude. Meeting that ran long. Then the traffic. The snow made everything more difficult. Clara noticed how different he looked like this, stripped of the armor of control he always wore. There was a vulnerability in his blue eyes that made her instinctively step forward. "You must be cold and hungry." William ran his hand through his wet hair. "I'm fine, Clara, you should go to sleep." But she was already heading to the kitchen. "Martha went to bed hours ago. I'll prepare something for you." "Clara, you don't need to—" "I know I don't need to," she interrupted him gently. "But I want to." The mansion's kitchen was enormous and intimidating, but Clara had spent enough time there with Martha to know where to find the basics. She put water on to boil and found herbal tea sachets in the cupboard. Her hands trembled slightly, not from nervousness, but from something deeper, a determination to care for this man who had been so kind to her. William appeared in the kitchen doorway a few minutes later, having changed his wet clothes for a dark sweater and casual pants. It was the first time Clara had seen him dressed so informally, and it made him more human, more approachable. "You didn't need to go to the trouble," he said, but sat at the kitchen table when she gestured to the chair. "My mother always said that hot tea can cure almost anything," Clara murmured, placing the steaming cup in front of him. "Well, maybe not everything, but it helps." William picked up the cup, and Clara noticed how his large hands wrapped around it carefully, as if it was something precious. "Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman." She was. Clara sat across from him at the table, holding her own cup to warm her hands. She always took care of Dad when he came home late from evening classes at the university. She said that a real home was a place where someone cared if you made it home. The words came out before she could censor them, and Clara felt her face flush. There was something very intimate about the confession, as if she were revealing more than she intended. William watched her for a long moment, steam rising from his cup between them. "And this place, does it feel like home to you?" The question caught her off guard. Clara looked around the enormous kitchen, thought about the vast mansion above them, the extensive gardens outside. "It's starting to," she answered honestly. Slowly. "I'm glad," William said simply, but there was something in his voice that made Clara's heart race. They drank their tea in comfortable silence, the kind of quietude Clara had learned to value. It wasn't the tense silence of the early days, but something softer, more intimate. "What was so important to keep you at the office so late?" she eventually asked. William sighed. "Problems with an acquisition. The company we're trying to buy has some legal complications that didn't show up in the initial analysis." "Is that common?" "More than I'd like." He looked at her across the table. "Do you really want to hear about boring business?" "I want to hear about you," Clara replied without thinking, then blushed again at her own boldness. But William didn't seem to mind. In fact, something in his expression softened. "There's not much to tell. Work, more work, endless meetings." "It sounds lonely." The observation made him pause, his cup halfway to his lips. "It is," he finally admitted. "It's been lonely for a long time." There was a sadness in his voice that made something contract in Clara's chest. Impulsively, she reached across the table and touched his hand briefly. "Well, now you're not alone anymore." William looked at where she had touched his hand, even after she withdrew it. When he raised his eyes, there was something different in them, a warmth she had never seen before. "Thank you, Clara, for the tea, for waiting. You're welcome." William stood up, but hesitated beside the table. For a moment, Clara thought he was going to say something more, but he just nodded slightly. "Good night." "Good night, William." When he left the kitchen, Clara remained seated for a few more minutes, looking at the empty cup where he had drunk. Something had changed between them that night. A small but significant bridge had been built over the chasm of strangeness that separated them. And for the first time since the marriage, Clara found herself looking forward to the next day, curious to see what other surprises William Blackwood might reveal. Spring had arrived in the Blackwood Mansion gardens, transforming the flower beds into explosions of color that competed with the paintings Clara had begun creating in the sunroom. She had discovered that art calmed her, allowing her to express the complex emotions she couldn't put into words. That Saturday afternoon, she was in the garden trying to capture the golden light filtering through the new leaves of the oak trees. "Did you inherit your artistic talent from your mother?" William's voice made her look up. He was approaching along the stone path, having traded his formal suits for casual clothes, khaki pants and a white shirt with rolled-up sleeves. "How do you know my mother was an artist?" Clara asked, lowering her brush. William hesitated for a moment. "Martha mentioned you asked for art supplies, I deduced." There was something in his hesitation that told Clara it wasn't the whole truth, but she didn't press. Instead, she turned back to the canvas. She painted watercolors mainly, landscapes, flowers, occasional portraits. She never sold anything, said she painted for the soul, not for money. "And your father?" "English literature at the local university." Clara smiled at the memory. He could recite Shakespeare from memory and knew more about the English romantics than any person should know. They met at a local art exhibition where Mum was displaying some pieces. William sat on the nearby garden bench, watching her paint. What were they like together? The question made Clara pause, her brush suspended in the air. It was the first time anyone had asked about her parents as people, not just as a tragedy to be mourned. "In love," she said finally. Even after 20 years of marriage, Dad still brought Mum flowers every Friday. Not expensive flowers or elaborate arrangements, just daisies from the garden or cherry blossom branches. And she always acted like it was the first time. They seemed to have something special. They did. Clara dipped her brush in a new color. They used to dance in the kitchen while preparing dinner. Dad sang off-key and Mom laughed so hard she almost burned the food. Our house was always full of laughter. She didn't realize she had started crying until she felt a tear fall on the canvas. William got up immediately, taking a handkerchief from his pocket. "Sorry," Clara murmured, accepting the handkerchief. "It's still hard to talk about them sometimes." "Don't apologize. They sound like they were extraordinary people." "They were." Clara dried her eyes. "Which makes what happened afterward even more cruel." William sat down again, closer this time. "What do you mean?" Clara hesitated. She had never talked about the details with anyone. Her aunt and uncle had made it clear it was a subject that shouldn't be discussed. But something about William's calm presence encouraged her to continue. "The accident wasn't just bad luck," she began slowly. "They were coming back from a meeting at the bank. Dad had lost his job at the university, budget cuts, and they were trying to renegotiate the house mortgage. And the bank refused, said that without Dad's stable job they were too high a risk." Clara's voice became firmer as old anger resurfaced. "My parents left that meeting devastated. Dad was driving, but witnesses said he seemed distracted, lost in thought. That's when the truck hit them." William became very quiet beside her, but Clara could feel tension emanating from him like heat. Uncle Gregory and Aunt Linda showed up at the funeral like concerned relatives, she continued, her voice becoming bitter. They said they would take care of everything, that I didn't need to worry about sordid details like money. I only found out later that the house had been sold to pay debts and that they had kept all the money. All the money? William's voice was dangerously low. They said the debts were bigger than they thought, that barely anything was left after everything was paid. Clara laughed without humor. Of course, that didn't stop them from buying a new car a few months later. William stood up abruptly, beginning to pace back and forth. His fists were clenched and Clara could see a muscle tensing in his jaw. William, are you okay? He stopped pacing and stared at her, and Clara was surprised by the fury she saw in his blue eyes, not directed at her but boiling just below the surface like lava about to explode. They robbed you, he said, his voice controlled but loaded with anger. First your parents, then your inheritance, and finally your freedom. There's just money. It's not just money, William exploded, then immediately controlled himself. Sorry, I didn't mean to yell at you. Clara stood up, approaching him cautiously. Why does this make you so furious? William ran his hands through his hair, a gesture she was learning to recognize as a sign of extreme stress. Because I know men like your aunt and uncle, predators who take advantage of vulnerable people, and because... He hesitated, then looked directly at her. Because you deserved so much better than that. The intensity in his voice made Clara's heart race. William, they can never hurt you again, he said, and there was an iron promise in his words. As long as you're my wife, as long as you carry my name, you'll be protected. I guarantee that. Clara moved closer, seeing beyond the anger to the pain he was feeling for her. You don't need to feel responsible for protecting me from everything. Yes, I do. His voice softened. It's the least I can do. They stood there in the garden, the golden afternoon light enveloping them, and Clara felt something fundamental changing between them. The respectful kindness was transforming into something deeper, more real. William wasn't just her husband of convenience, he was becoming her protector, her defender. And for the first time since her parents' death, Clara felt truly safe. Thank you, she said softly. For what? For caring. William looked at her for a long moment, then surprisingly reached out and gently touched her face, wiping away a tear she didn't know had fallen. Clara, he said, his voice almost a whisper, you deserve to have someone care. And in that moment, in the garden bathed in spring's golden light, Clara began to believe that maybe he was right. The weeks following the moment in the garden brought a subtle but noticeable change in the dynamic between Clara and William. He arrived home earlier from work, often finding her in the library or sunroom where she painted. Conversations during dinner were no longer punctuated by uncomfortable silences, but by genuine mutual curiosity. Clara had begun to notice small details about her husband, how he unconsciously loosened his tie when he was thoughtful, or how his eyes lit up slightly when she shared some happy memory of her parents. That Friday night, a spring storm lashed at the mansion's windows. Clara was in the library, lost in a volume of Keats' poetry, when William appeared in the doorway. He looked exhausted, but there was something more, a melancholy she couldn't identify. Mind if I join you? He asked, gesturing to the armchair near the fireplace. Of course not. Clara marked the page and closed the book. Difficult day? William poured himself a glass of whiskey from the small bar in the corner of the library before sitting down. No more difficult than usual, just reflective. Clara watched how he swirled the amber liquid in the glass, lost in thought. There was a vulnerability in his posture that intrigued her. May I ask what's causing this reflection? William took a sip of whiskey before answering. Today would have been Catherine's birthday, 42 years old. The confession hung in the air between them. Clara felt a strange pang in her chest, not exactly jealousy, but something close to it, mixed with compassion. You still love her, she said softly. It wasn't a question. I'll always love the memory of her, William replied honestly. But today, for the first time in 5 years, I realized the pain wasn't as sharp as it used to be. Clara didn't know what to say to that, so she remained silent, waiting. Catherine and I married for love. William continued, looking at the fire crackling in the fireplace. A young, impetuous love that survived 10 years of marriage. She made me a better person. How did you meet? A ghost of a smile touched William's lips. At an art gallery, actually. I was 26, fresh out of Harvard, trying to impress important clients. She was there with friends, laughing about something one of the sculptures reminded her of. Her laugh was infectious. Clara could imagine him young, less controlled, capable of falling in love with a stranger's laughter. She was everything I wasn't, William continued. Spontaneous, artistic, able to find joy in the simplest things. She balanced my seriousness. And she died of cancer, leukemia, diagnosed 2 years after marriage. We fought the disease for 3 years before his voice failed. The last months were difficult. Clara leaned forward. William, you don't need to talk about this if it's too painful. Actually, I think I need to. He looked directly at her. You have the right to know what kind of man I am, what kind of past I carry. What kind of man are you? William laughed bitterly. A man who completely shut down after losing the only person he loved, who buried himself in work for 5 years because it was easier than facing loneliness. And why did you marry me? The question came out before Clara could censor herself, but William didn't seem offended. Honestly? Initially, it was practical. My lawyers suggested that marriage would improve my image for certain business acquisitions. Married men are seen as more stable, more trustworthy. He paused. And your aunt and uncle weren't subtle about your desperate situation. Clara felt her stomach sink. So it was a business transaction. It started that way, William admitted. But Clara, you need to understand, I never imagined you would be... What? You? He stood up and approached the window, watching the rain. I expected a young gold digger, maybe spoiled, who would have her own reasons for accepting an arranged marriage. I didn't expect to find someone genuine, intelligent, with an inner strength that rivaled any executive I'd ever met. Clara's heart raced. William, and I definitely didn't expect to start caring. He turned to face her. I didn't expect you to bring life back to this house, or to me. Clara stood up, approaching him slowly. And that scares you. Terrifies me, he confessed. I lost Catherine and thought I'd never recover. The idea of feeling something like that again, of risking that pain once more. But you are feeling something, Clara said softly. William studied her intently. And you? The simple question carried the weight of months of careful dancing around unexpressed feelings. Clara knew her answer would change everything between them. Yes, she whispered, I am. William moved closer to her until they were just inches apart. Clara could feel the heat emanating from him, the subtle scent of his aftershave mixed with whiskey. Clara, I don't want you to feel obligated to anything because of our arrangement. I don't feel obligated, she replied, looking into his storm blue eyes. I feel hopeful that maybe 2 broken hearts can help each other heal. William raised his hand and touched her face gently, as he had done in the garden. Are you sure? Because if we do this, if we allow this to become real, I'm sure, Clara said, covering his hand with hers. For a moment, they stayed like that, suspended between what they were and what they could become. Then William leaned in and pressed his forehead against hers. I don't want to hurt you, he murmured, and I don't want you to feel guilty about moving forward. William pulled back slightly to look at her. How did you become so wise? I learned that life is too precious to waste on fear. And in that moment, in the firelit library, with the storm roaring outside, Clara saw something in William's face that made her realize they had crossed an invisible line. There was no turning back. They were embarking together into unknown territory, and for the first time in months, Clara wasn't afraid of what they might find there. The days following the confession in the library brought a sweet and growing tension between Clara and William. It wasn't the discomfort of the first months, but something charged with unexplored possibilities. They found each other more frequently. Breakfast together in the sunroom, walks through the gardens after dinner, conversations that extended into the early hours. Each interaction was like dancing on the edge of a precipice, both aware that one wrong step could change everything. Clara had begun sleeping poorly again, but this time it wasn't nightmares about the accident keeping her awake. It was the growing awareness of William sleeping in the room next door, so close yet still separated by walls and by the promise he had made not to force anything. She found herself listening to his footsteps in the hallway, imagining what it would be like if he stopped at her door, if they broke the careful barrier they had built between them. On Tuesday night, 3 weeks after the storm in the library, Clara woke to the sound of cries coming from William's room. Her heart raced as she sat up in bed, clearly hearing his voice through the walls. Not cries of anger, but of anguish, like someone fighting invisible demons. Without thinking, Clara got up and ran to the hallway. William's bedroom door was slightly ajar, and she could see him in bed, writhing under the sheets, lost in some nightmare that tortured him. "No. Catherine, no." His voice was hoarse, desperate. "Don't leave me." Clara hesitated for only a moment before entering the room. She had never been there before. It was sacred territory, the last frontier between them. The room was masculine and elegant, decorated in shades of navy blue and grey, but what struck her was the fragility of the powerful man thrashing in the enormous bed. "William," she called softly, approaching the bed. "William, wake up." He continued moving, trapped in the nightmare. Clara sat carefully on the edge of the bed and touched his shoulder. "William, it's just a dream." His eyes opened abruptly, disoriented and wild for a moment, before focusing on her. He sat up quickly, his chest rising and falling with rapid breathing. "Clara, what? You shouldn't be here." "You were having a nightmare," she explained gently. "I heard you screaming." William ran his hands through his sweaty hair, clearly embarrassed. "Sorry. Sometimes I still have dreams about Catherine's last days. I thought they had stopped." "Don't apologize." Clara stayed where she was, her hands still lightly touching his arm. "I understand nightmares." They sat in silence for a moment, the intimacy of the situation hovering between them like mist. William was wearing only a white t-shirt and pajama pants, and Clara could see the raw vulnerability in his eyes that he normally hid so well. "Do you want to talk about it?" she asked. William looked at her, really looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. "The dream is always the same. She's slipping away, and I can't reach her. And then she's gone, and I'm alone again." "But you're not alone," Clara said softly. "No." There was something in his voice, a question that went far beyond words. "No," she confirmed, her eyes meeting his in the room's dim light. William slowly raised his hand and touched her face, as he had done so many times before, but this time was different. This time, Clara leaned into the touch, allowing her eyes to close for a moment. "Clara," he murmured, and there was a world of meaning in her name on his lips. "Yes, I don't want to be alone tonight." The simple confession broke the last barrier between them. Clara opened her eyes and saw everything she had hoped to see: desire, tenderness, and something deeper that made her heart race. "Then don't be," she whispered. William leaned toward her slowly, giving her time to pull back if she wanted. But Clara didn't want to pull back. She wanted this, wanted him, with an intensity that surprised her. When his lips finally touched hers, it was as if all the air was sucked from the room. The kiss began tentative, questioning, but when Clara responded, deepening the contact, something awakened between them like long dormant fire. William pulled her closer, his hands tangling in her hair, and Clara let herself melt against him. It was her first real kiss, not the quick formality at the altar, but something born from desire and the emotional connection they had built over the past weeks. When they finally separated, both were breathless. "Clara," William whispered against her lips, "I need you to know what I'm feeling for you is real." "What are you feeling?" she asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. "I'm falling in love with you," he confessed, the vulnerability in his voice making Clara's heart race. "It wasn't what I planned, it wasn't what I expected, but—" "Me too," she interrupted softly. "I'm falling in love with you too." The smile that spread across William's face was like sunrise, slow, warm, transformative. He kissed her again, more deeply this time, and Clara felt as if she were waking from a long sleep. "Should I stay or go?" she asked when they separated again, leaving the decision in his hands. "Stay," William said without hesitation. "Please, stay." Clara settled beside him in the enormous bed, and William pulled her into his arms. For the first time since her parents' death, she felt completely safe, completely loved. "I love you, Clara," William murmured against her hair. The words she had thought she would never hear, that she would never believe coming from him, were spoken with such sincerity that she felt tears burn her eyes. "I love you too," she whispered back. And that night, entwined in the gentle darkness of William's room, two lonely hearts finally found their way to each other, discovering that love could grow even in the most unlikely ground. 2 years had passed since that transformative night in William's room, and the Blackwood mansion had become unrecognizable. Where once a heavy, formal silence reigned, now laughter and animated conversations echoed. Clara had brought life to every corner of the house. Her paintings decorated the walls, plants bloomed in every window, and the library had become the beating heart of their home, where she and William spent evenings reading together or simply talking about everything and nothing. Their marriage had evolved from a cold arrangement into something that surprised even the mansion's staff. Martha frequently commented to the other employees about how Mr. William smiled now, how there was a sparkle in his eyes that hadn't existed for years. And Clara, the shy, broken young woman, had blossomed into a confident woman who managed the house with grace and filled William's heart with a joy he thought he had lost forever. That October morning, Clara woke with a strange feeling in her stomach. It wasn't uncommon. In recent weeks, she had felt nauseous and more tired than usual. Initially, she attributed it to the stress of organizing the Blackwood family's annual charity gala. But when Martha brought breakfast and the smell of eggs sent her running to the bathroom, Clara began to suspect something more. "My dear," Martha said gently when Clara returned to the room, pale and shaky, "when was your last... well, you know." Clara stopped moving, realization hitting her like lightning. Oh my God. Perhaps we should call Dr. Morrison," Martha suggested with a knowing smile. 2 hours later, the family doctor confirmed what Clara had already begun to suspect. She was approximately 8 weeks pregnant. "Congratulations, Mrs. Blackwood," Dr. Morrison said with a warm smile. "From what I can assess, both you and the baby are perfectly healthy." Clara sat in silence for a long moment after the doctor left, her hands instinctively moving to her still flat belly. A baby. She and William were going to have a child. The joy that flooded through her was immediate and overwhelming, but along with it came a wave of nervousness. How would William react? They had never specifically discussed children, though he was affectionate with the children they encountered during social events. She decided to wait until dinner to tell him, carefully planning how to reveal the news. But when William came home that night, an hour earlier than usual, with a bouquet of yellow roses, her favorites, Clara lost all composure. "William," she said as soon as he entered the living room, "I need to tell you something." He must have sensed something in her voice because he immediately dropped the flowers and approached her. "What's wrong?" "You look different. I'm pregnant." The words came out before she could elaborate on a more elegant revelation. William became completely still, his eyes widening as he processed the information. For one terrible moment, Clara feared he was shocked in a negative way. "Pregnant," he repeated slowly. "Yes, Dr. Morrison was here today, 8 weeks." Clara held her breath, waiting for his reaction. Then William did something completely unexpected. He knelt in front of her, placing his hands gently on her belly. "Her baby," he whispered, and when he looked up at her, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Clara asked, though the answer was obvious on his face. "Happy." William stood up and pulled her into a hug, spinning her carefully. "Clara, I'm ecstatic. I couldn't even dream we could have this." In the months that followed, Clara discovered a side of William she had never seen. He became extremely protective, insisting she rest more, hiring the best medical team in Charleston, and even reading every book about pregnancy he could find. He talked to the baby every night, his large, warm hands gently caressing Clara's growing belly. "Good night, little one," he would murmur before sleep. "Daddy and Mommy are anxious to meet you." Clara's pregnancy progressed without complications, and as her body changed, William treated her as if she were made of precious porcelain. He had transformed one of the rooms adjacent to theirs into the most beautiful nursery Clara had ever seen, painted in soft shades of green and yellow, with a window overlooking the garden where she had spent so many happy hours. On the night of May 15th, Clara woke with strong contractions. William, in controlled but visible panic, immediately took her to the hospital, holding her hand throughout the entire trip and whispering words of encouragement. "You're the strongest woman I know," he said whenever a contraction hit her. "You can do this, we can do this." After 12 hours of labor, Thomas William Blackwood came into the world with a healthy cry that echoed through the delivery room. Clara, exhausted but radiant, watched through tears of joy as William held their son for the first time. The powerful, controlled man she had known was completely transformed. His hands trembled as he held the tiny baby, and tears flowed freely down his face. "Hello, Thomas," he whispered, his voice broken with emotion. "I'm your daddy." "He's perfect," Clara murmured, reaching out her arms to hold their son. William carefully placed Thomas in her arms, then sat on the edge of the hospital bed, wrapping both mother and child in a protective embrace. "Our miracle," he said softly, kissing Clara's sweaty forehead. "You're both my miracles." Clara looked at the baby in her arms, small, perfect, with his father's blue eyes and the small nose she recognized as her own, and felt her heart overflow with a happiness she never thought possible. "I love you," she whispered to William. "And I love you both more than life," he replied, and Clara knew he spoke with the complete sincerity she had learned to recognize in him. In that hospital room, with her husband and son, Clara realized her journey had been completed in a way she never could have imagined when she walked down the church aisle 3 years ago. 3 months after Thomas's birth, the Blackwood mansion had completely transformed into a true home. The sound of children's laughter echoed through corridors that once knew only formal silence, and there wasn't a corner of the house that hadn't been touched by the joy of a family that had grown from nothing to become everything. Clara was in the nursery, rocking Thomas after his morning feeding, when she heard familiar and unwelcome voices in the main foyer. Her blood ran cold as she recognized Uncle Gregory's calculating tones and Aunt Linda's affected comments. They hadn't made contact since the wedding, and their presence now could only mean one thing: they wanted something. "Clara!" Linda's voice echoed through the house. "Where is our dear niece?" William appeared in the nursery doorway, his face a mask of icy control that Clara hadn't seen in a long time. "Your aunt and uncle are here," he said simply, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "What do they want?" "I don't know yet, but you can be sure it's not a social visit." William approached and gently kissed her forehead. "You don't have to see them if you don't want to." Clara looked at Thomas, sleeping peacefully in her arms, then at the man who had become her strength, her protector, her true love. "No, I want to see them. It's time to end this once and for all." They went downstairs together, William with a protective hand on Clara's back, Thomas nestled in her arms. In the living room, Gregory and Linda were examining the changes in decoration with expressions of barely disguised envy. "Clara, dear," Linda approached with outstretched arms, as if they were a loving family that gathered regularly. "You look radiant. Motherhood suits you so well." "What do you want?" Clara asked directly, ignoring the false embrace. Gregory laughed, the same calculating sound she remembered from when they announced her forced marriage. "Straight to the point, as always. Well, actually, we came here to congratulate you on the baby and, well, discuss some family matters." "What matters?" William asked, his voice dangerously low. Linda exchanged a look with Gregory before answering. "Well, as you know, we sacrificed a lot to take care of Clara after her parents' tragedy. We invested time, money, emotional energy." "You sold her," William interrupted coldly. "Now let's be civilized," Gregory said, his features hardening. "The fact is that Clara benefited immensely from our care, and now that she's well established, we think it's fair that there should be some financial recognition for our contribution to her well-being." Clara felt nauseous. "You're asking for money. We're suggesting appropriate compensation," Linda corrected with a fake smile. "After all, without our intervention, Clara never would have met William. In a sense, we're responsible for all this happiness." William moved to stand in front of Clara and Thomas, his presence radiating a silent but palpable threat. "Get out of my house." "Now, William," Gregory tried a conciliatory tone, "we're family. Surely we can reach an agreement that benefits everyone." Family? William's voice was loaded with disdain. Family doesn't sell orphaned children to pay off debts. Family doesn't steal inheritances from vulnerable teenagers. Linda stiffened. We did what was necessary. You did what was convenient, Clara interrupted, finding her voice. You took advantage of my grief, my desperation, my youth. You treated me like merchandise. Clara, you're being dramatic, Gregory said impatiently. You should be grateful. Look where you are now. I am grateful, Clara said, looking at William, but not because of you. I'm grateful for the man who showed me what real kindness is, who protected me when you abandoned me, who loved me when I thought I would never be loved again. Thomas began to stir in her arms, and Clara rocked him gently. The sight of his wife protecting their child against the same people who had betrayed her years before awakened something fierce in William. You have 30 seconds to leave my property, he said, his voice as cold as winter. And if you try to contact my family again for any reason, I'll make sure you regret it. You can't threaten us, Gregory exploded. William took his phone from his pocket. Should I call security, or will you leave on your own? Linda grabbed Gregory's arm. Let's go, they'll regret treating us like this. No, Clara said firmly, surprising everyone. You'll regret it if you try to blackmail us again. Because now I have something I didn't have when I was a scared 19-year-old girl. What? Linda asked with disdain. Clara looked at William, then at Thomas, finally finding the strength that had grown within her over the years. I have a real family that protects me, and I will protect this family at any cost. Gregory and Linda finally left, their empty threats echoing through the foyer before the door closed firmly behind them. Clara sat heavily in the nearby armchair, trembling slightly from the adrenaline rush. William knelt beside her immediately. Are you okay? I am, she said, surprised to realize it was true. For the first time since I've known them, I'm not afraid of them. William gently touched Thomas's face, then Clara's. They'll never bother you again, I promise. Clara smiled, covering his hand with hers. We're a family now, aren't we? The strongest family there is, William confirmed, kissing her forehead. And I'll protect you both forever. That afternoon, sitting together in the garden where Clara had spent so many lonely hours at the beginning of their marriage, she watched William play with Thomas on the blanket spread on the grass. The sun filtered through the oak leaves, painting everything in golden tones, and Clara felt a deep peace settling in her heart. She had started as a broken young woman, sold in marriage to settle debts, but through patient and true love, she had found not only a home, but her own strength. And now, watching her husband whisper promises of protection to their child, Clara knew that her journey of pain had transformed into the most beautiful story of redemption. Love had won, and they were finally, truly free. Clara had started as a broken young woman, sold to settle other people's debts, but she discovered that even in the coldest arrangements, true love can flourish. William learned that a broken heart can love again, that loneliness isn't permanent when you open yourself to the possibility of starting over. Together, they proved that family isn't about blood or contracts. It's about choosing to care, protect, and love unconditionally. Sometimes what seems like the end of everything is just the beginning of something extraordinary. If this story touched you, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments, where are you listening to this message from? Your support is what allows us to continue bringing stories like this. Stories that show that love can transform any situation, no matter how impossible it may seem.